Mine says live.
Okay, we must be live. I can't see it on
Yay, we're
Facebook.
live.
Oh, yes, it's coming up.
My first live Facebook.
Okay, we're on. Oh, hello. Welcome, everybody that's tuned in so far. Welcome to the first ever Bake Like a Vegan Pro episode. So every month, I interview a professional vegan baker or chef, and we have exclusive Q&A in our group. This month, we are interviewing the amazing Gretchen Price, who is an amazing professional vegan chef and baker. Gretchen has over 20 years experience as a professional baker, has owned her own bakery for 10 years, and she now has a huge YouTube channel, a blog at Gretchen'sVeganBakery.com, where she shares all her recipes and baking tips. And I just wanted to let you know if you want to find out all about everything we talk about today, Gretchen's YouTube channel, her recipe book, the product we're going to talk about, just pop over to my website, click on Make It Like a Vegan Pro, and you'll find all the links there. So just before we get started, and I get Gretchen to start, just wanted to let you guys know how it's going to work today. We're going to break it up into 4 sections. The first section, we're going to talk about Gretchen and how she transitioned into a professional vegan baker. Then we're going to let Gretchen share with her top tips and tricks for cakes, pastries, icing and fillings. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Gretchen's latest product, which is the vegan egg replacer, which is called the plant-based egg. And then we're just going to let the floor open up and everyone can ask any questions that they want. Now, you can ask questions all the way through the interview. Just make sure whenever you're asking a question that's related to the topic that we're talking about. And then at the end, if we didn't talk about what you wanted to, simply just chuck in a question and we will answer it. So before we get started, Gretchen, I just want to say thank you so much for coming here today and joining us. You are such an amazing inspiration in the vegan baking world. You have helped so many people.
Oh, thank you.
And we're going to give Gretchen a really warm welcome as our first interview. Yay!
Yay! We did it. So if I look like I'm really focusing and concentrating, it's because the audio is really not that great. So I'm really like trying to read lips right now. So
They're saying Mike's not very great too.
Yeah. So I'm like really focusing in. So I look really concentrated. So just bear with that.
So Gretchen will do most of the talking anyway, so if my audio is a little bit bad, sorry about that, guys. We're still working out technical difficulties.
So, well, yeah, I just want to say first, thank you for having me on here. And I am going to be sharing this video once we're finished with the live feed. We're going to actually upload it to our YouTube channel. So
yes.
I want to just say to my people who don't know who you are, Sara Kidd has an amazing YouTube channel. So we're going to leave all the links below to Sara's YouTube channel as well. And so if you guys really want to go ahead and check her out too, she has a fabulous Facebook group that honestly, it's my favorite group that I'm in. So Yay! If you guys want to check that out too, Sara is just doing such unbelievable work in the vegan community. So yeah, this is a really good pair up. So I'm so thrilled that you asked me to be your first interview on your new Q&A series.
Yes.
So
do you want to start?
Yeah, basically you asked me what was your first question, was really how I transitioned into becoming a vegan baker, because obviously I wasn't that my whole life. I do have 20 plus years experience in the professional baking industry, but only it was late 2016 that I transitioned my blog and my YouTube channel to all vegan. So I had been vegetarian since around 2009. I'd say late 2009 is when I went finally for real vegetarian. But I had still, and I was in my bakery, and I was still using the cow cream cheese and butter and milk and eggs. And I mean, I had a pretty big bakery. Well, my bakery was small in terms of like when you think of like commercial, but for a small hometown bakery, it was pretty big. And during the height of our seasons, I mean, man, just getting in hundreds of pounds of cream cheese and hundreds of dozens of eggs and gallons upon gallons of milk. And even though I was vegetarian at the time, there still was just something that didn't seem right about that. I just made the connection of, man, how taxing that must be on the animals. And so it wasn't until late 2016 that I finally transitioned to full vegan in my personal life. And so naturally having and at that time I had already sold the bakery. I was out of the bakery by 2015. So 2016 was when I made the full transition to vegan. And so I lost my train of thought, but just
Tell us about like going from having a vegan, non-vegan bakery and then transitioning it.
right.
How did you go
So
about that? I'm sure a lot of people are doing the
yeah.
same thing.
Well, right. So since I didn't have the bakery anymore, but I did have my YouTube channel and blog, which was completely non-vegan. I was still showing people how to make, traditional recipes with animal products. And, at the end of a video, people want to see you eating your creations. And I had always done that. But as it became more of a conflict in my brain around what I was advertising and in my personal beliefs, I stopped eating all of the cakes at the end of the videos because I just didn't want to do it anymore. So that for me was when I really knew that I needed to get authentic with what I was doing. And I could no longer keep making these non-vegan recipes when I didn't even want to bring myself to eat it anymore. So, that was a bit of a hard, I mean, it's one thing if you just transition to vegan in your personal life, but it's another thing when your business is attached to the industry that you are against. And so that was a hard decision for me. But I had to be true to myself. And I'm so glad that I did, because I mean, there's peace that comes around just being authentic, right? And,
Yeah.
so that's how that whole thing happened. And so that was a big jump for me to do that, knowing that I would lose a lot of people, a lot of my following, my YouTube channel, people going to my blog. And I did, but I also gained a lot of people too. I gained a whole new community of vegan bakers, and
Yeah.
that is amazing. So yeah, that's basically my transition personally, and then obviously it translated through to my business, which is the YouTube channel and my blog.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to start transitioning, like working out what milk to use, how to replace like eggs? And,
Okay.
how was it like really difficult, or did it come naturally?
The thought of it all before I actually dove into the whole testing of it, the thought of it was difficult, because I literally was like, I'm never going to bake again. How I'm trained traditionally with, like most of us were, with how to make recipes with eggs and milk and all the animal products that we rely on to make this stuff work, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'll never bake again. And so, but obviously I didn't give up. I said, I have to really give this a try. And with many, many failures, one after another, I finally started really getting a grip on these new plant-based ingredients. And so I think, it is frustrating when, obviously when recipes don't work. I mean, that's so frustrating. And I think my biggest problem I had with shifting my recipes from non-vegan to vegan was thinking that I just had to substitute like 1-to-1 or straight up, and that wasn't necessarily the case. And I'll get into that more when we talk about the, the cake tips and tricks and things like that. And what I've found to be the most effective when transitioning your recipes from non-vegan to vegan, you know, it's not exactly, and you probably know this too, there is some tweaking. Like you can't just now, if your recipe calls for a stick of butter, I mean, a lot of times it does work if you use a stick of vegan butter, but what I've found is there has, you know, some tweaking. You need a little bit less of the fat for vegan baking. You might need a little bit more flour. And then it's the egg replacer. The egg replacer is definitely, in my experience, has been like just crazy to try to replace. And I do see that that is the most asked question in all the Facebook groups that I'm in, or people are pretty confident with, you know, vegan butter and plant milk, whether they're using soy or almond like that. But the egg replacer question, just like I see it every day, all day. And then when I see the answers that people give, I'm just like, no, because it's not a one size fits all answer. I mean, most people quickly want to say, well, just use flax or just use applesauce or just use a banana. And it's like, well, yeah, those things work, but it's not a one size fits all fix. And so that for me has been the biggest area of trying to figure out.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It took me a little while to work out exactly how eggs worked in baking when I first started a really long time ago, and working out that not every egg replacer that you use works on the same recipe.
That's right.
Yes, so it's amazing what you've done to educate the community on how to use egg replacers, and you've got some amazing videos on your YouTube channel for people to check out. You can also use Gretchen's science behind cooking and using vegan egg replacers on her YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
Can people hear me okay?
I didn't hear you. Say it again.
Can people hear me? Can someone comment, let me know if you can hear me?
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, is that better?
Yeah, actually, that is better. Keep talking.
Okay, sorry everybody for the technical difficulties.
That is
I was
way
just
better.
saying, in summary, if you want to check out Gretchen's YouTube, she's got some amazing egg replacing videos on there, which goes into the science of vegan baking, which will give you a more in-depth understanding of how to use vegan egg replacers to the best of your capabilities. So does anyone have any questions before we move on to the next topic?
Are you seeing questions? Because I'm not seeing anything on my view.
There's been some comments of people. I'll just put a little.
Man, I gotta tell everybody, I was in the sun today and I am like, I look like I'm red like a lobster and I'm sweating.
No, you look great. I'm looking at you on my phone. You look good.
Okay.
So just moving on to the next section, which is going to be really nice and juicy. We're going to talk about your top vegan baking tips. Do you want to share with us your top cake baking tips to start?
I think that's what I started to talk about, was realizing after so many trials and errors that it's not always exactly a straight one-to-one substitute in cakes that use butter. Obviously, we have vegan butter, which is technically the same thing as margarine. I mean, essentially, at the end of the day, it's really just all oils that we're using now. So yeah, that I have found that if you cut out, like for example, if your recipe calls for 8 tablespoons of butter, which is a stick of butter, I would probably recommend taking out about 2 tablespoons of that fat when making a vegan recipe. And I hate to generalize and say that's the truth straight across the board, but 9 times out of 10, that is where I'll start, is just to kind of reduce some of that fat, especially in recipes that have eggs in them, originally had eggs in them. So, and again, replacing the egg in the recipe has been my most difficult task. And I guess where I like to always go back to is the science of baking and understanding what your ingredients do in your recipes. That's always where I've started from when I started my YouTube channel all the way back in 2011, I think it was 2010. I always came from a place of like the science of baking and understanding what your ingredients do. So, for example, I'm going back to the egg again because I always go back to the egg when it comes to vegan baking recipes.
Yep.
It's crazy. But what is the egg doing in your recipe? Is it just binding? Is it leavening? Is it, you know, like for sponge cakes where we would used to whip them and foam them and they would come up to, you know, so we have the wonderful aquafaba, but how many people have had success baking with that? I know I have not had much success baking with aquafaba, I'll be honest. So it's really just
I can
understanding
relate.
what those ingredients are doing in your recipe and then how can you best replace it. So, you know, when people say they use applesauce or banana as an egg replacer, like, yeah, that works, but to me that tends to make our cakes especially a bit heavy, a bit gummy, and I feel that vegan cakes are can be a bit gummy to begin with. So then to add
Yep.
another ingredient that's really high in moisture, it's going to really weigh it down more. So, I mean, it's like just so much information to go into all of this science of baking. But like I'm saying, I do recommend people just really think about if it's a cookie recipe, what is that egg doing in there? It's most likely it's binding the recipe together.
Yep.
And it's interesting as I transition to vegan, I realized how many recipes really just don't need egg and actually don't need egg replacer. You
Yeah,
know?
I found that as well, actually.
Yeah. It's just
Yep.
really changing a mindset. And that was probably the most frustrating part for me because I was so like, this is how I learned and this is how I have to do it. So I have to stick to that. And
Yep.
so what I've figured out about vegan baking is that you can change methods and like it's almost easier now that I
Yep.
realized it wasn't
Yep.
that hard, you know?
Yep. I found that in my experience of making cakes, especially now that I'm developing so many recipes, I'm not always thinking about eggs. It's almost like sometimes they just seem like this ingredient that people have been using as a traditional ingredient
Yeah,
baking
just
for such a long
because
time.
they had tons of them in the yard and they needed to get rid of them. So they just started throwing them in everything. Like sometimes it feels like that
Yep.
because there's so many recipes out there that work beautifully with nothing added, no eggs added at all, and not
Yep.
even egg replacers, honestly.
So we've just got a couple of questions. We've just got one from Molly, and it's to do with egg replacers while we're talking about it. And she's just asking what's the best egg replacer in baked cheesecake?
In cheesecake, I would definitely say cornstarch. Because you have to again think about what is the recipe of a cheesecake. Even think about it non-vegan. A cheesecake is a baked custard. Essentially it's a baked custard. It was a recipe that had a lot of eggs in it, a lot of dairy in it, and so you need to thicken that, and cornstarch is really, in my opinion, the best thickener for a cheesecake. Some people like to use arrowroot, which would work equally well.
Mm.
And I do sometimes add some flour to my cheesecake. Like cheesecake on my blog is probably one of the most, my bulkiest category of recipes. Like I love cheesecake. I feel like I
Yep.
nailed my cheesecake recipe and I just make it all the time. So for me, cornstarch definitely, because it's a baked
Yep.
custard and that's
So
what's going to thicken
just
that.
for other people who aren't American, cornstarch is corn flour.
Yeah,
Just
right.
so everyone knows.
Yeah, right. So
Okay,
that was a good
awesome
question.
answer.
What's that?
I've just got another question. Rachel is asking how much agar to add to sugar syrup before adding it to avocado meringue to make marshmallow fluff. Have you got any advice or?
To make marshmallow fluff? Oh,
Yes, stiffer.
well,
She wants to make it stiffer.
okay. Well, I have found that different like where you're getting the agar has different strengths. So you sort of need to start there, because what I had when I first started substituting agar for gelatin in recipes, obviously I was just testing, so I was following other people's recipes using agar just to kind of see how it worked and at what quantities do I need it. And what I found pretty quickly was that there's different strengths of it. So I don't, and that was a few
Yep.
years ago, right? And so like if their recipe was saying use a teaspoon, I was using a teaspoon of whatever agar I got, and it was like a brick. It was like this rubbery. So
Yep.
I do find with agar is that you kind of have to test to your own, to like where you're getting it, and kind of do a little test just to see. I do have a blog post. If you go to gretchensveganbakery.com, and I have a whole section on my blog called Baking 101, and it reminds me of the
So good.
It reminds me of the post you just made the other day, though. It was like lengthy blog posts, but this and I agree
But it wasn't
with
about your
you.
life story.
No, I agree
It's
with you
actually
when it
about
comes
baking.
when it comes to recipes. I agree. I don't want a lot of story. I also, excuse me, just want to get to the recipe. Let me get a drink.
Yep. Okay. Are you still there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Good.
Okay.
Yep.
So what I was going to say is my whole section of Baking 101 is nothing but lengthy blog post of a lot of science. And so I have a really good blog post called Agar as an alternative to gelatin. And I think if you go there, you could read the whole thing. It's really it really is helpful information to kind of figure out where to start with agar when it comes to putting it in your recipes.
Yep. So yeah, go check out that on Gretchen's Bakery for more information. We've just had some more questions come through. So we've got a question: what do you think of the importance of soy milk used in cake? I've been thinking if water and vinegar can work instead of milk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do get that question a lot. The thing about milk and plant milk as well is that there are proteins in these milks, and proteins do help kind of carry a lot of the other ingredients through the recipe. So I mean, it is, and also has fat in it too, which is helpful. And that's why I use soy milk a lot, because it is the highest in fat, and so it does tend to be thicker. And if you're trying to make a vegan buttermilk, it is the only plant milk that will sour.
Yep.
So soy milk is my plant milk of choice. I do use almond milk often, because it, like, I just try to stick with the thicker milks, because it, like I said, it does help carry the other ingredients through. And so when you're talking in terms of what the protein is doing in that recipe, I do prefer to use plant milk. Oat milk is another one. Hemp milk is another great one that has tons of protein in it. You know, I stay away from like rice milk, which is really thin.
Yeah.
You know, so but then that's like, okay, does it work? Yeah, it'll still work, but it's not the greatest. So I got that question recently. Somebody was like, you know, this person I'm baking for, they can't do soy at all, and they can't do any of the nuts. And so, you know, you start going, well, can you do oat? Can you do hemp? Like, there are so many different milks that you can choose from. So, you know, in terms of flavor and the protein contents and the fat contents that all of these milks lend to the recipe, yes, it's best to try to stick to a plant milk.
Yeah, I agree. Soy milk is always my choice, and I really enjoy using coconut milk. But a lot of people don't like that flavor, but I just like how much fat is in that milk.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really love coconut milk for many recipes, except for scooping off the fat and whipping it to cream. Yeah, that's pretty much where I use coconut milk.
Yep. Okay, so next question. We've got a heap coming through, so I'm firing them at you. What can I use as a substitute for butter? As in my town, I cannot find any vegan butter.
Wow, yeah, that is a problem I'm finding for people all over the world. They're just having a hard time finding these vegan ingredients. But I want to say margarine has been around for quite a few decades, and maybe people just don't realize that margarine basically is vegan butter. So if that is true, you could definitely use margarine. However, you do have to check the packaging because some margarines will still use milk in them.
Yep.
So, you know, I mean, alternatively, you could use shortening. It's not the greatest, but that would work for recipes that are creamed, where you're creaming the fat with the sugar. You could definitely use shortening, margarine, same thing as vegan butter, which actually brings me to another tip. I don't know if it's a tip, but it's sort of like a topic. Talking about can I use oil instead of vegan butter in a recipe? And that answer is yes, as long as you're what's the mix method is what my question is next. If you're creaming, where we're creaming the butter and the sugar together in the beginning, you can't use oil because oil is not going to cream. Basically, there's a science behind creaming where the sugar, the pointy edges of the sugar really start poking into that fat, and it makes air bubbles in the sugar, and that's what helps rise your cakes. So if you're just sloshing around oil with sugar in a bowl, it's not creating that effect, and your cakes aren't going to rise as well. You're going to have a heavier cake. Alternatively, though, yeah, I mean, but if your recipe starts out with oil, you could definitely use melted vegan butter instead. So it's sort of like, well, you first have to understand how the recipe is being mixed to know if you can then substitute one for the other.
Yep. Oh, that's such great advice. Okay. Molly's also asking, have you tried anything with pea milk?
Pea milk? No. Yep. I haven't ever seen that near me.
She said it's really high protein and has some fat. So I guess what we could say, Molly, is just test it.
Yeah.
See how it goes.
Is that something that's being sold, or?
Yeah, it's pretty new.
Wow. You know, and it's so funny because I'm here in New Jersey in the US, and New Jersey is right next to New York. So, you know, you tend to like, we're like mini, like wannabe New York because we're so close. So you would think that like all of this new, you know, New York usually gets everything first. I tell you what, people out in Ohio are getting things faster than me here in New Jersey. It's like I have a crazy time trying to find some of these ingredients too. So I feel you.
Well, you should try and live in New Zealand.
Really?
There's nothing.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm the last person to get anything.
Yeah, it's getting there though. I feel like it's really like, you know,
the movement here is going great. I think I'm just a bit of a snob because I've moved from Sydney and it's really booming there.
Yeah, right.
So, but New Zealand is beautiful. I love living here. Anyway, moving on. So Molly's asking lots of questions for saying I get a lot of customer inquiries about not using palm oil shortening. Do you have any suggestions on how to make buttercream without palm oil?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And it comes up a lot, you know, it's almost like how vegan are you, right? It's like those kinds of questions.
Yes,
and
it can be difficult.
Yeah, I would say because I have tried to make homemade vegan butter. I mean, I've made vegan butter. It's easy. It's so easy to make your own vegan butter, but trying to then put that into a recipe, specifically buttercream, absolutely disastrous for me.
Yeah.
Because the base of a homemade vegan butter is going to be coconut oil. Coconut oil is so fragile that as soon as you throw it into the mixer, it just it's a mess. And so I haven't done that. And so, yeah, I mean, as far as, you know, looking into sustainable palm oils, which a lot of, like, for example, here in the US, we have Earth Balance vegan butter, which I think it's the best tasting. It works the best in recipes. They do claim to be sustainable. But, you know, it's like, then again, you know, I get into those groups and it's like, well, no, they're lying or they're really not. Nobody should do it at all. And it's sort of like, you know,
I think it's a really difficult topic because everyone's just trying to do the best that they can with what they've got.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's it's not always an easy solution, and sometimes the only option is to buy something that's claiming to be sustainable and then continue to look for other products that are palm oil free.
Right.
I'm lucky I have Nuttelex, which has a palm oil free version, and that bakes really well, even though it is based on coconut oil. It just works on everything.
Yeah.
But it's not always the case. Let's not judge people. Let's just do the best we can with what
Yeah,
we've got.
that's where I come from too. It's like, you know, I didn't even know until, I mean, look, I've only been full vegan since late 2016, but it wasn't until the middle of that that I didn't realize that Oreos here in the US are technically not vegan. I mean, they are, but the sugar that they use here in the US is processed through bone char. So it's like, wow, I didn't even realize that until like 2 years ago. And so it's like you said, okay, well, now that I know that, now I buy Newman's O's, which is a different brand of Oreo. It's an Oreo cookie, but it's organic and it's sustainable, and you know, it doesn't have processed bone char sugar. So it's like, as you learn this, then you can make better choices. And you know, so I think, you know, I'm sure you see this too, just like in these groups, people get attacked, especially new vegans. Well, oh, that's not vegan, you're not fully vegan. It's like, man, it's a turn off. So I agree, like what you say, you know, we're doing the best that we can, and the more we know and the more that we use our dollars to, you know, essentially vote for these products, the companies are going to start changing and following suit. We're seeing it. We are seeing it happening. It's awesome.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree. So I want to just move us on a little bit, because it's already been 30 minutes.
Oh, it
is?
So
quickly.
It's so fun.
Give us your top tips for pastries, because you do make a lot of pastries and everyone loves your pastry recipes. So what have you got for us?
Well, you know, that was a tough one when you gave me my little briefing on my list of questions you'd be asking. And I'm like, you know, I mean, pastries to me, when I think of pastries, I think of eclairs, cream puffs, like little miniature things. Like, I don't know, that's what I think of when I think of pastries. And so as I like, because that's such a broad topic, it's like, all right, how do I really have general tips for that?
Why don't you start off with, like, because most pastries are obviously based on a butter and a flour, so talk about what types of butter and flours you recommend.
Well, it all goes back to the egg replacer, I think. Like, I think of my eclair recipe that I worked for months on perfecting, and it actually was perfect. It was amazing. And then I was using the vegan egg by Follow Your Heart as the egg yolk portion in that recipe, with some whipped aquafaba, because I was trying to make it exactly like we would a traditional pâte à choux recipe. And like literally a month after I perfected that recipe, had it out on the blog, had the video, Follow Your Heart changed their formula, and now it doesn't work anymore. So that's so frustrating when you're relying on a third party company to make your recipe work, because they can change it at any time, or you can't get it. So I don't know, like when I think of pastries, I think of the egg replacer, obviously, and you know, a lot of whipped cream stuff. And so I do have another recipe on my blog. It's like, it gives you like 3 versions of homemade vegan whipped cream. And so I think that's helpful when making pastries, because most pastries need whipped cream. And how many cans of coconut milk can you actually buy and use where you're scooping off just like, you know, 5 tablespoons of fat? Like, if you're making a lot of pastries, you need a lot of coconut fat. So I do have a couple alternative recipes that will help you through your pastry madness for whipped cream recipes. But yeah, I couldn't, like, I don't know, does anybody have a specific question for pastries? I don't feel like I have like general tips in that area.
Well, I can't see any questions coming through. So why don't we just move on to icings and fillings, because every time someone is asking for a buttercream recipe in the group, your name constantly comes
Yeah,
up,
that's
and
really
your
cool.
recipes are everywhere.
Yeah, I love to see that. I feel like from my inception on YouTube, I've been just known for buttercream. And that's a cool thing. So, yeah, a lot of people really
Yeah,
love my recipe. I have 4 recipes for buttercream. One is an American style version, which is just vegan butter and confectioner sugar. It's the easiest one to master, and it's really very good. Then I mastered the Swiss meringue buttercream, which was made from aquafaba, and that was a total success. And it's awesome. It's just so silky and smooth, and
it's great.
it's less
Yep.
sweet. It's just great. But you know, some people do have some failures with it, so that brings me back to the aquafaba hack that I came up with. That sort of goes back to the other person's question about using agar in aquafaba. So I do have a little hack there that'll help you along, because the agar is going to help stabilize that aquafaba meringue, so that once you do start throwing in the butter, I mean, a lot of times it will break, because that's just what a buttercream, you know, it could do that.
Yep.
And so my biggest tip for making buttercream is, again, you have to think about what these ingredients are and what they're doing. Buttercream is essentially an emulsion. It's
Yep.
where we're trying to force these 2 ingredients that do not want to play together. We're forcing them to play together. So through agitation, which is, unfortunately, guys who don't have a stand mixer with a whip attachment, you're going to have a really hard time making a Swiss meringue with aquafaba with a hand beater.
Yeah.
So that's tip number 1. It really is helpful to have the balloon whip attachment to get the volume you need. And then, you know, and the high speed of that, because that's what's creating that emulsion. When it's whipping, you're throwing in the fat, we're basically forcing it together. But people still do have fails when it comes to that. And so my most recent hack for a failed buttercream, other than just keep whipping it, it'll eventually come together. I'll dump it into a blender, just a blender, and then just whiz
Yep.
it on high, and it will come back together, because again,
Yep.
it's an emulsion and you need to force those 2 ingredients to stick together.
Yeah, I do that a lot too. When fillings or custards or icings
When
just
they
go
break.
crazy, I just put everything in the blender.
Yeah, yeah, because
It's a good
like I
hack.
said, when you think about what it is, essentially this stuff is like just emulsions. So yeah, we have to change our mindset sometimes, and you know, people get so scared, and it's like, I rather than get scared, I get mad, and I'm like, oh no, you are not going to do this. We are going to figure out how to make this work. Whether it's, you know, throwing it in a blender, then that's what it's going to be.
That's such a great tip, and I think it's really good to highlight that we all have failures,
Oh,
and that's the
totally.
great thing about the group.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, share them, troubleshoot.
Absolutely. I got to tell you, look, like you're on here like, oh, it's Gretchen and she has 20 years experience and this and that. Honestly, I learned so much from being in your group, especially because there's so many amazing bakers and pastry chefs in that group, just so freely sharing tips. And
Yep.
I've got to say one thing about the vegan baking community. I've compared to the non-vegan, there was so much competition amongst bakers and recipes and tips, and that I don't find that in the vegan community. I feel like everybody's so willing to, and open to share and help, and I love that, because we are after
Yep.
the same goal. I mean, we just, yeah.
Yes.
So
We're absolutely a beautiful community, and the group just holds so many amazing people. People have become friends in real life
I know,
through this
it's
group
really
and are baking
cool.
together.
So if you
It's
haven't been
amazing.
part of Sarah's Facebook group, you have to go check it out. All the links are going to be below again, as usual.
So I just wanted to circle back.
Mm-hmm.
Molly had a great question uh, asking about what do you do for croissants, because that's a pastry.
Oh, did you say croissants?
Croissants.
What do I do for them?
Yeah, do you have any
Meaning,
tips around making croissants?
well, vegan butter could work very well. The only other thing about vegan butter that you do have to keep in mind, but you know what? I found the same thing to be true with cow butter back in the day, is that different companies, different brands, there's different moisture contents in the brands, and I think you just have to find the one with the least amount of moisture is going to work the best. And when it came to making croissants, like there's something in butter called plasticity, and it doesn't mean there's plastic in it. They use that term even when talking about cow butter. It's how much it's going to roll out, because that's what you're doing with croissants when you're forming that roll in of the butter. It needs to be able to roll out like, and that's what they call plasticity. So I think it's really just finding the best quality vegan butter is going to work the best. And as far as replacing the eggs in the dough, honestly, I do find flax to work really well in bread doughs, but also any proprietary blend egg replacer would probably work too.
So, okay, so 2 questions. So the first one is, do you want to explain what a flax egg is for anyone that's a complete beginner?
Okay. I feel like that's where everyone in vegan baking starts, is with the flax egg. That's where I started. I mean, that's all I knew to do. I was like, all right, how am I going to do this? Oh, okay, flax egg, which is basically just flax seeds ground down to a fine powder like a meal. And then when you add water to it, it gets like, they call it mucilage. It's actually a naturally occurring like gelatinous mixture in several plants, actually. If anybody has ever cooked okra, which is disgusting, in my opinion, okra has that sticky mucilage stuff. And you could actually use that in baking because it's a binder, and it's going to mimic the egg. So that's the flax.
Right. Okay, thank you. And we've got a question from Joanne. She said, why do you love the heart egg replacer? Follow your heart egg replacer. It's quite expensive. Do you recommend it? Is it worth it?
The follow your heart egg replacer, like I said, I had the most success with that with my eclair recipe, and I was just thrilled. But they changed the formula recently. I think they couldn't get the algal flour any longer, and then they replaced it with a soy mixture, and it just doesn't do the same thing. So algae is a great binder, and so they just couldn't get it. I'm sure they didn't do it on purpose. They just couldn't get it anymore at the capacity they needed it. But I would use the Follow Your Heart vegan egg whenever I wanted to replace an egg yolk, because I felt like it really was so similar to the egg yolk in its binding properties. But now that they've changed, I really don't use it that much anymore, honestly, and it is expensive.
Yeah. Well, we will get to your egg replacer that you keep
I use that now, the plant-based egg, in 90% of everything I make now. I'm biased.
Fantastic. Okay, hold on before we go there. Do you have any more tips for icings or fillings? And is there any more questions?
I did. I'm just looking at what I wrote down. One of the things that I found with vegan baking is that the cakes don't freeze as well, and that could just be my experience. I don't know about you, if that's
it depends on the cake. Like if I make a white chocolate cake and then freeze it and defrost it, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's like it gets so dense, right?
Yes.
It doesn't come back.
Yes.
So that's what I've been finding too, and it's crazy because that was like, I was an advocate for that in my non-vegan days. And I remember, like I'm saying, I've been doing this 10 years now on YouTube, and people were appalled when I was using frozen cakes. And I was like, okay, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. Even when I went to CIA, we froze the cakes. I mean, in a commercial setting, it's unheard of to not freeze cakes. So I always was an advocate for freezing. It's just so much easier to build a cake that's not like rock hard frozen, but cold, less crumbs, easier to work with. It holds together better. but I
Yes.
don't like freezing vegan cakes anymore. So I just do refrigerate them if I'm
Mm.
not going to build it right away. And a couple days in the fridge, wrapped really well, it stays totally fine. And you know,
Yep.
that's the other thing that I find about the vegan butter is that it doesn't get hard inside your cake in the refrigerator, which is a
Right.
great thing, because when we were using cow butter and you'd have to, like, for example, if you have chocolate mousse or whipped cream as your
Oh,
icing,
yeah, of
you
course.
have to refrigerate that cake, but then the cake would get hard. Vegan butter, similar to oil, your cake stays soft, whether it's
Mm.
in the fridge or not. So I do love that part about vegan cakes.
Mm.
Yeah.
I found that sometimes with my lighter butter cake, I could freeze them, but
Uh-huh.
not for very long. It really depended on the cake because vegan cake can be more dense, and the more
Yeah,
dense, the less you can freeze them.
that's true. And the cheesecakes, I won't freeze them anymore. They just, their texture changes completely when they
All
thaw.
right. Oh,
So,
that's good advice.
but the good thing about vegan ingredients is that they have such a longer shelf life. Like, this stuff doesn't
Yes.
turn. You can
Yes.
leave it in the fridge for like 2 weeks. Not that that's ever
Yes.
happened because I just eat it all, but like you could, if you had to, leave it in the fridge for longer.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well, especially when I applied for my health and safety certificate, is that none of the vegan products could get contaminated like
Yeah,
milk, meat, or dairy. Which is
yeah,
great.
right. I agree.
Okay, next question. This one's from Rachel. What is the best frosting to dam between layers? As I have bulging when I wake up in the morning. I've experienced this as well. So what do you recommend, Gretchen?
Well, because vegan butter doesn't get hard, that's, I guess, the con. So I was saying it
Yep.
all in a positive way, but that would be the con because it doesn't get hard in the fridge. And, you know, that's what we would rely on for to use the dam. Even a crumb coat, you'd want it to get nice and hard, but it doesn't do that. So the fix is to just, you can't use as much filling, I find,
Yep.
in the vegan cakes
Yep.
as you can with, you know, because it's just, they are going to bulge a little bit.
Yep.
I don't, you know, I don't find that, like, I've had that happen here and there. Like my most recent, one of the most recent cakes I did, somebody even said that. They were like, wow, how do you fill your cake so much and you don't have bulging? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the earth balance. I do find that to be a superior brand, but it is pricey.
Mm,
I'll
I
save that for my icings and use the cheaper margarine for a lot of my baking.
Yeah, I agree. When I was in Sydney, my cakes wouldn't bulge, and now I'm finding in New Zealand that they are, and I've changed ingredients, and different climate
Yes.
contributes to that.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Okay, another question. I love your IMBC, and I'm converting it to vegan IMBC.
Oh,
Will
the
it go hard
Italian.
in the fridge with non-vegan IMBC, like the non-vegan IMBC?
Okay.
Can you use vegan IMBC under fondant, and what's the best for under fondant cake? Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes. Yes to both. Yes, you can use it under fondant. And what's the best cake? I mean, this didn't change from vegan to non-vegan, from non-vegan to vegan. The answer was always you can really use any cake under fondant as long as you build the cake properly. At least
Mm.
that was always my experience. I mean, whether I was using a sponge cake, a butter cake, a pound cake, like no matter what cake I was using, as long as you build it properly, and then that goes back to not overfilling it so that you don't have bulging, getting a really good crumb coat on there, and then not rolling your fondant so thick because that's just going to be heavy and that's just going to
Yep.
pull down.
Can you just let everyone know what IMBC
Oh
stands
yeah, that's
for?
the Italian meringue buttercream. So you'll see that a lot. It's IMBC or SMBC for Swiss meringue buttercream. So people will just abbreviate like that. And so the Italian buttercream method is where you're cooking a sugar syrup and you're pouring that into the whipping aquafaba versus a Swiss buttercream where you're just dissolving the sugar into the aquafaba first and whipping it up. The Italian meringue buttercream is probably a little bit harder. You do need a thermometer, but it is the strongest of all the buttercreams. So that probably would be, I always say, well, it's your preference. It's really what you make the best and what you like to eat the best. But the Italian meringue is going to be the strongest of all the buttercreams.
And would you recommend that one for under fondants?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that was the next question. So you
Yes.
pretty much answered that.
Glazed over that. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, I just want you to tell our amazing audience a little bit about this product you've been developing and you use it on your baking now, 90%, which is your vegan egg replacer product, and it's called the plant-based egg.
Yes, it is an egg replacer called the plant-based egg. With a company called Freely Vegan, and I am affiliated with them on a small level. My friend Deborah actually developed this product. Deborah happens to be celiac, and so she cannot touch flour. She has to bake completely everything gluten-free. And so she developed, first of all, she developed the plant-based egg as a vegan egg replacer. And it works beautifully in gluten-free. Now, I'm not a gluten-free baker by any stretch of the imagination. So she actually hired me on to test the entire wheat line with this plant-based egg. So together she developed it, I tested the wheat line, and it has become my go-to egg replacer. Like, I use it all the time for everything, and not because I have a small part in it. It's because I won't I won't try to make you guys buy stuff that I don't think is great. But I do think this egg replacer is great, and I use it for 90% of all of the recipes that I make now. And I say 90% because it can't be used in everything. Like, it doesn't whip like aquafaba. It is an egg replacer that is more, I'm going to compare it more to like Bob's Red Mill, for example, where it's a blend of different thickeners. And but her blend is amazing. It's really great. And we'll leave links below to that as well if you guys want to check it out. I do use it in almost all of my recipes now because I just think it's really that great. And like, why we don't need to have all of these different egg replacers. When you find one that really works for most of your recipes, then I would stick with that. And it really does. So and she also has developed a gluten-free baking mix, an all-purpose flour. Like I said, I'm not gluten-free. I know you've done some gluten-free recipes and videos. There's so many people that seem to be asking if you can substitute gluten-free flour for most of these recipes. And I am finding, what I've learned is that when it comes to a vegan recipe, it's harder to sub in straight one-to-one gluten-free flour because some things have to change, and specifically the fat has to change even more than your vegan recipe, but also because there's so many gums in gluten-free, because that's what holds everything together, that you just get this heavy, dense, rubbery, and that's why I never did gluten-free, because I'm like, oh God, it's awful. But you've done a lot with, I don't know if you've done a lot, but I know you've done some gluten-free, and it's more difficult, isn't it?
It totally is, with my experience with gluten-free, because that's how I first started baking gluten-free, sugar-free cakes. That was an opening in the market for me that were vegan. And I found that the smaller you make the cake or the cupcake, the more success rate you have.
Okay.
And you really got to think about your fats. I always like to use a shortening because it's greasier, and it kind of helps the cake hold more moisture.
Okay.
But I'm not an expert in gluten-free baking. It isn't my main thing. I do struggle with it sometimes.
Well, so I was saying all of this to say that she's also developed an all-purpose flour blend that has no gums in it, and it already has the egg replacer in it. And she sent me a couple bags of it, And I was like, oh, I really don't want to test this. I don't like gluten-free. I was so amazed at this gluten-free blend. I made my banana bread that I usually make, obviously not gluten-free, and I made it. And my boyfriend, who is my biggest critic of all the things I bake, because if he doesn't think it's good enough, he's like, you're not putting that out there. That needs more work. And, you know, because I'll be like, yeah, it's good. And he's like, nah, it needs more work. So he's, you know, he pushes me to make sure that everything is as perfect as it should be. So I made this banana bread with the gluten-free blend, and he actually liked it better than my perfected wheat version. And I was like, wow, I don't know how to feel about this. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but that's how good this blend is. So I am going to be using that more. I'm getting so many people asking me about gluten-free. And I'm just like, oh my God, I just got a grip on the vegan baking. Now I've got to do gluten-free too. I'm like, oh, it's so much learning.
Yep. But it's great though. I feel once you get your head around it,
Oh yeah.
you just zooming
Yeah, you're like,
along.
yeah,
Yep.
I'm amazing.
Okay, I've got some more questions. Rachel's asking how far in advance, I just have to look at my phone, can I make fondant decorations? And should I use, is it Tylos powder or just refrigerate them to harden?
Okay, I missed the beginning of that question because it was breaking up.
Oh, sorry. How far in advance can I make fondant decorations?
Oh, okay, I got that. And Tylos powder.
Tylos, yeah.
You know, if I'm not much of, like, I pretty much am a recipe person. I don't get into doing a lot of decorating. I was doing that in my bakery, but nowadays I really just kind of stick to the recipes, the science of baking. So I'm not the greatest one to ask about, you know, fondant decorations and things like that. But what I do know is that you do, like you said, add a bit of the Tylos to it to make it harden up, because otherwise fondant's just going to droop back down. So yes, you're correct there. How far ahead? I mean, when I was doing these decorations in my bakery, I was making them a couple weeks ahead of time.
Yep.
As long as they're stored properly, and you know, a lot of people are, you know, steaming them right when they go on the cake. So again, I don't feel that great answering a question like that because I'm not really a big decorator. So I mean,
We will have some professional cake decorators on the show.
yeah. So
Guys
save
know.
that
So
question
maybe
for
save
them.
those questions
Yeah,
for then.
definitely.
Okay, I've got some more questions. Oh, it's more of a statement. Oh, it seems most vanilla cake recipes claim to be light and fluffy, and when I make them, they seem to be dense. This is from Rachel again. So what do you think is some advice you can offer her?
I would look at the egg replacer, honestly, because that is, in my opinion, where you're going to get all of those differences in the final result. Is really, like I said, if you're adding applesauce, banana, even flax can weigh a cake down, because flax is a heavy has a high fat egg replacer. Actually, it has a lot of natural omegas, and so it's great for you, but it's going to add some fat to your recipe, and that in itself is going to weigh it down. And again, I mean, there's so many recipes out there claiming to be the best and the fluffiest and the most amazing. And, you know, it's,
I say that all the time.
I do too, because, you know, of course mine are. How can yours be if mine is? So, but, you know, I think it's just really looking at the amount of fat. You might have to take out a little bit of that fat. You know, and who, I don't know who's authoring the recipes that you're looking at. So again, there's 100 best vanilla cake recipes out there that claim to be the lightest and fluffiest, and you know, they're all going to come out different. So I would look at the fat amount. You might want to take some of that out. Definitely look at the egg replacer. And also the flour. Cake flour is lighter than all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is going to absorb more liquid than a cake flour will. So that's why we tend to use that. I use blends a lot. You'll see in my recipes, I'm like a cup of all-purpose and a cup of cake flour, because I like to do blends. So it's really looking at your ingredients again and understanding what they all are doing. But you know, you could look at my recipe or Sarah's recipe for the best vegan vanilla cake, fluffiest.
Woohoo! Okay, I'm just looking at some more questions. My buttercream always has a lot of air bubbles. I've tried some troubleshooting, but I can't seem to get it right. Any tips?
Okay. Yeah, what I'll do before I ice any cake, even if I just made a fresh batch of buttercream, I'll the paddle versus the whip. Whip is going to put air into your recipe. So if you used the whip to make your buttercream, definitely switch to the paddle and just paddle it on low speed for like 5 to 10 minutes, really low. It's going to push out all of those air bubbles, and it's actually going to make it whiter because that's what it does. And it's just going to make it really smooth and so much easier to work with. So that's my best tip for that. A lot of times I have a blowtorch. I don't know if you guys have seen me use my blowtorch before, but I will pop on that blowtorch and just hit the bottom of the bowl, the KitchenAid mixer bowl. I have a KitchenAid, so if you have a stand mixer, I'll hit the bottom of that metal bowl with the blowtorch. Not enough to melt it, just to warm it, little spurts of warm. I'll tell you
That's a
what,
good
that's
idea.
going to get it really smooth and silky.
Oh, that's such a good tip.
That's a good like secret tip. Yeah.
Ooh.
Not to the point you're melting it. Just little bursts of heat as it's mixing. You guys will see. It's gonna be
Oh,
really
that has to be the tip of the whole show.
Yeah, that's the whole. Yep. We could just end it here. Drops the microphone. Right.
Okay, well, we are about to end the show, but we've got a few more questions hold on. How can you stiffen buttercream even more so it's easier to pipe?
How can you do what?
Stiffen buttercream.
Yep. That's going to be shortening. You know, so many people don't want to use shortening in their buttercream, but vegan butter is essentially shortening, so you're already using shortening. And if you can find a good high ratio cake shortening, that's the only reason I use it. It's not lending flavor by any stretch, but it is going to add stability to your recipe. So that's really the answer. I don't have much more to say than that. Got to use shortening.
We had a question from Lydia, which you covered earlier. She's just asking about can you cover freezing or non-freezing cakes ahead of time before frosting? Which you were talking about, you don't recommend freezing cakes.
I always say do a test on a small, especially if it's for a client or an event. If it's a new recipe that you've never used before, I would definitely make a little layer and just pop it in the freezer and see, because I don't like to generalize because all recipes are different. But in my experience, I don't like to freeze them. The texture of them changes. They get really dense. They just don't fall back to their lightness that they started out as. So I would always just do a test. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that's tuned in and going to watch this later. This is going to go up on my YouTube channel and Gretchen's YouTube channel if you want to watch it later, and obviously it's going to be in the group as a video itself. Thank you so much to everyone that contributed, asked questions, and obviously having Gretchen is amazing.
And forgive us, this was like our first time doing this technology and this, right, for the live. I hope the audio was okay. But that was fun. I'm glad we did it.
Yes. So if you want any of the information of where to find Gretchen's products, books, YouTube, you can go to my website and click on Bake Like a Vegan Pro, or you can just head over to Gretchen's website, which is Gretchen'sVeganBakery.com. And I'll see everyone again next week for another amazing episode. Thank you so much, Gretchen.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll see you guys on Facebook in the group. That was so much fun. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye for now.